Hey everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods, and this is the quick version of our recap on our annual charts and graphs message. This meme was made in January of 2023, and bring it up just because we're coming back to this theme at the end of the year. This year started and ended with a fight about fossil-fueled fascists and the 14th Amendment. But really, this is a story about fossil fuels, and in particular about two gaps between what we say we're going to be doing about fossil fuels and climate change and what we actually are doing. First one is the production gap here in the US and around the world. We are producing way too much fossil fuels, way more than we can afford to burn if we're going to live up to the promises we made under the Paris Agreement or the Biden administration made to American voters. And second is the finance gap. These are related, but we are investing too much money in new fossil fuel infrastructure and especially fossil fuel export infrastructure here in the US. And that is what is causing the imbalance between our climate pledges, what we say we're going to do about climate change, and what's actually happening in the global warming climate chaos that we're all experiencing. And this is happening despite this was a pretty good year for renewable energy and for the kind of green energy, Green New Deal's transition that we all want, and which in theory, world leaders like President Biden and other national leaders are in favor of. Solar installations way up in the US this year. That's all great news. Uh, Sales of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles and all that kind of stuff way up this year, and that's really good. And a bunch of states followed the lead of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was trying to scale up use of renewable energy and clean sources like for transportation and heating, like heat pumps and like electric vehicles. And so a bunch of new states have promised to get to 100% renewable energy faster over the next couple of years. And that's all good news. But as we keep saying, the problem with all of these things, with the Biden administration's policy and with the state level policy and with all of these regulations and things that are being enacted by agencies like FERC and the Department of Energy and the EPA and other folks, is that they are not confronting fossil fuels. They are pro renewable energy, but they are not anti fossil fuel. And because they're not anti-fossil fuel, they're also not anti-fascist. And there's this really direct causal link between the politicians who are most funded by the fossil fuel industry, like Donald Trump and Joe Manchin, and fascism and a particular kind of political repression and control. And it's also very much tied to war and militarism. And that's been a big theme of our work this year, is to draw the connections out for people so that you can see really clearly the war in Ukraine is really influenced by Russia's fascist policy, pro-fossil fuel policy around Europe and fossil fuel exports. Likewise, we're spending a huge amount of money funding not the transition to renewable energy, but the export of fossil fuels, and that is politicizing and militarizing places around the world in a way that they don't need to be, and it's contributing to both climate change and to war and fascism around the world. And time and again, because Biden wouldn't make a distinction between being pro-renewable and being anti-fossil fuel or being anti-fascist, he kept making the wrong decision. We saw it at the agency level with things like the approval of the Willow Arctic Oil Project, the approval of Alaska LNG, not taking the side of climate youth in the Juliana v. US case, not siding with people of Cancer Alley in Louisiana in an EPA settlement. Time and time again, agencies rejected this idea of being anti-fossil fuel, even though they were at times being pro-renewable. And one of the most striking decisions was midsummer. President Biden literally negotiated a deal with Joe Manchin in the Senate and Kevin McCarthy in the House to ram through the Mountain Valley Pipeline over the objections of local residents, local landowners, local courts, local health regulators, local environmental regulators. All of those things were pushed to the side so that a fossil fuel pipeline could get built. And that was the very clear expression of Biden choosing the side, not only of fossil fuels, but of fascism, of saying, we don't care who gets hurt, who gets killed, whose property is taken, what the damages are. This thing gets built for the benefit of the fossil fuel companies and nobody else. And that was a really, I think, shocking for many people. We saw it coming and we were fighting against it for a long time, so it wasn't necessarily surprising, but it was really sharply stark. So around the middle of the summer, after that MVP decision came out of the Biden White House, we really changed approach. We stopped looking for solutions that we could implement through agencies to make them better on environmental justice and move the needle on that pro-renewable energy policy to be more anti-fossil fuels. And we just sharpened our rhetoric right up. You saw that over the summer as we saw climate disaster after climate disaster, the fires in Hawaii, floods up here in New England and New York, all kinds of disasters, big wildfires in Canada as well. Lots of different things were happening all over the world that were really bringing this starkly home that the climate crisis was here, it was an emergency, and that the only way to effectively combat it was to combat fossil fuel use, and in particular, fossil fuel expansion. And that's what the big marches and rallies and direct actions this fall were all about in New York City, in San Francisco, and in lots of places around the world. People took to the streets and took nonviolent direct action, again, aimed at those two gaps, the production gap and the finance gap, to try and ramp down the impact of fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels. So far, it hasn't changed policy yet, though we did change some of the wording and conversation about it. But we have seen at the end of the year, we got a bunch of new reports that showed we were right. We always knew we were, but it came out and really clearly in data that the climate impacts of new fossil fuel infrastructure, the Biden administration has already approved. That's stuff like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and especially of new fossil fuel export infrastructure. That's stuff like the CP2 gas export terminal that is still pending as a decision before FERC and the Department of Energy. Those things are more than offsetting the gains, the benefits of policies like the Inflation Reduction Act. So pro-renewables is not enough to fix climate change. In fact, being pro-fossil fuel and pro-renewable at the same time is making the climate crisis much worse. And we're leading the world in the wrong direction, as we have sometimes said, because we are so pro-fossil fuel and so pro-fossil fuel export right now that it is hurting the planet more than we are benefiting the planet with policies that are pro-renewable, like the Inflation Reduction Act. And also, we were right all along. We always do it, but it's nice to be validated. Right at the end of the year, a great report came out from our friends in the Ukraine, really clearly documenting the links between fossil fuel exports in particular and dictatorships, authoritarian governments, and fascist governments around the world. So, like I said, the one big victory we did have clearly and conclusively was that we changed the rhetoric around fossil fuels. So the COP agreement for the first time agreed that phasing out fossil fuels was the goal of international climate action. Didn't talk a lot about details, but we did name fossil fuels and say that we were going to move away from them. And that's also changed the rhetoric of the Biden administration here at the end of the year in 2023, which is really good. Because, like we said, we need them to become an anti-fossil fuel and an anti-fascist government. And to get them to do that, the first step to solving a problem is admitting that you have one, and they have to, and now have admitted that fossil fuels are the source of climate change, and that we have to move away from them in order to fix climate change. So, like I said, we're ending the year a lot like we started. Trump's back in the headlines, and specifically about this call we've been making really since 2021, that the 14th Amendment should preclude him and other insurrectionists from running for office. But it has brought this back up, and the really clear connections between the fossil fuel industry, which continues to invest in Donald Trump, and Donald Trump continues to promise more fossil fuel investment and expansion if he is elected president again, and also leaders around the world who follow that same model of fossil fuel exports and fascist political power working hand in hand to create a sort of petrostate solution. And we see there opportunities for the Biden administration to finally, it's not too late, but it's none too early, for them to change their position, especially on fossil fuel exports. And in particular, we're looking at the CP2 decision as sort of a hallmark, as a vanguard. That's their chance to make a change in policy that will affect the whole of the economy and the whole of fossil fuel exports. So we're going to pick up right in 2024 with these two themes again: ending fossil fuel exports, ending fossil fuel policy in the US, and also fighting against fascist policy and fossil fuel fascism as those two things work together around the world. So if you haven't already, there's lots of opportunities down below in the blog. There's links to all the sources and footnotes where we got all these charts and graphs. There's also a longer version, which has even more data and analysis in it if you want to watch that, and a longer write-up. But we hope at the end of the year, if you agree with us that you need to solve the climate crisis, we need to resist fossil fuels, and we need to resist fossil fuel fascism, and that we want to have a digitally supported, nonviolent direct action movement to do those things. We hope you'll chip in $1.98. You can do it once a week or once a month if you would like, to support our work all through 2024. From everybody at 198 Methods, thanks so much. Happy New Year.